Um, Welcome to this webinar hosted by Wish London. My name is Hony Premlal. I am one of the board members for Wish London and I will be host for you today. I would like to thank you for taking your time and attending this session. Today's webinar is about employment rights during COVID-19. Our panel chair is Theresa Mohammed. Theresa is a Wish London board member and partner at Trowers and Hamlins. She specializes in contentious and construction. She has extensive experience in acting employers and main contractors, main high court applications, and enforcement of adjudications decisions in the technology and construction court. Welcome, Theresa.
Thank you.
We also have four versatile and fantastic panel members. Nicola Ihnatowicz. Nicola is a partner, also as a partner at Trowers and Hamlins, and she specializes in all aspects of employment law and advice on TP, large restructures, changes to terms and conditions, and equal pay. She also deals with employee relations matters, including discrimination, diversity, redundancies, compromise agreements, disciplinary grievance issues, working times, sickness absence management, employment contracts, and ET claims. Wow. Welcome, Nicola.
Thank you, Hony.
And Catrin Jones. Catrin is the group director of corporate service at Clarion Housing Group. And Clarion is one of the largest social housing providers in UK. And she is responsible for a range of corporate services, including HR, facilities, deeds, governance, health and safety, internal audit, and legal services. And welcome, Catrin.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone.
And Nikki forward. Nikki is the Director of Human Resourcing at Ocean Housing Group, based in St. Austell, Cornwall. She specializes in people and organizational development. She also is passionate about coaching and supporting teams and people to achieve their full potential. And welcome, Nikki.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
And Mara Thorne. Mara is highly experienced HR consultant at Thorne Consulting Limited, whose wide-ranging career started in the late 1980s and spanned a number of different industry sectors and types of organization. Her mission now is supported by two experienced associate consultants to help SME clients with their employment-related challenges, taking the pain out of people's issues. And enabling them to get on with running their business. So welcome, Mara.
Thanks, everybody.
This webinar is going to be for 60 minutes. We're hoping to finish around 2 o'clock, and it will be recorded. If you wish to ask any question to the panel, please send your questions in the chat session. Please be interactive as much as possible. On that note, I'll pass on to our chair, Theresa Mohammed. Enjoy your webinar. Thank you.
Very much, Hony. Right, everyone, so what we're going to do is work through some pertinent issues around this topic, and I'll be asking each of the panel to address you. And then, as Hony says, if you could put any questions in the Q&A, I will try to get to those at the end of the presentations. And also, we will be running some polls throughout, so please do participate. Right, so the first topic we're going to talk about is managing furloughing and the rights of furloughed workers. Tracy, could you put up our first poll, please? And first person to speak on that topic, could I go to Nicola, please?
Thanks, Teresa. So I thought it'd be worth just starting with a little summary of what the furlough scheme was and what it was designed to achieve. Because although I'm sure lots of people are now intimately familiar with the furlough scheme, it probably helps just to have a little reminder from back at the beginning of lockdown when it first came in. So the scheme was designed to offer support to employers to help protect some of those jobs which were significantly affected by COVID. So jobs which perhaps couldn't be done from home or which were affected by some of the lockdown requirements, such as in hospitality and catering, for example, so jobs that can't be done remotely. And the idea was that the employer has the option to place an employee on furlough, which means that they can't do any work for the employer. And the employer can then claim a contribution from HMRC towards that employee's employment costs. So it was capped so the employer can claim up to 80% of the employee's wages, plus employers' national insurance and auto enrolment pension contributions up to a maximum of £2,500 a month. And it had to be in periods of at least 3 weeks at a time. This month, as things begin to relax and workplaces begin to get back to something resembling normal, I'm sure we'll talk about what that actually might look like and whether normal is something we're ever going to see again. But the furlough scheme is also changing. So from this month, we now have flexible furlough. So employers can bring people back off furlough on a part-time basis. So they can be working part-time and continue on furlough the rest of the time. And in addition, over the next few months, the government is slowly winding up the scheme. So over the next few months, gradually, the amount that the employer is required to pay goes up, and the amount that they can claim back from the government goes down. So it's trying to sort of slowly nudge employers back to bringing people off furlough and back into work where they can. One of the interesting things for the sector was whether or not the scheme was open to employers in receipt of public funding. The scheme itself, it said that it was open to all employers, but there was a very strong steer from the government that it expected that publicly funded employers wouldn't be needing to take advantage of the scheme because they're still receiving funding for the services that they provide and for their staff. Of course, for a lot of housing roles, actually, they fall somewhere in the middle. It's not quite so clear cut as it's 100% publicly funded or it's 100% privately funded. So one of the issues, which I'm sure some of the other panelists will talk about, especially for some of the bigger RPs, was whether it was the right thing to do to take advantage of the scheme. So there are lots of interesting issues for the sector.
Thank you, Nicola. That's really interesting. I wondered if I could take this topic to Nikki next, please.
Yeah, we had to make the decision early on as to whether we were going to participate in the job retention scheme. And because we had, as part of our group, a construction company and a property maintenance side as well, we knew that they wouldn't be able to work from home and that we'd have people that were inactive in work, and so we decided to participate in the scheme. We made the decision as a business to top up to pay 100% of wages, and we put people on a scheme. At the peak of the scheme for us, between sort of April, May time, we had about 25% of our workforce furloughed, as I say, mainly in those areas, and the rest of our workforce were still able to continue working from home. We had a few challenges during the furlough scheme. We had recently done a small restructure in our construction company, un-COVID related, prior to lockdown, and we had about 15 members of staff who fell in that awful gap of not being covered by furlough. So I sought the support of Nicola. We had a lot of agony over that, on the basis that we couldn't provide support for them and we couldn't re-employ them. It was very difficult with the TV announcing just ask your employer and they can re-employ you. It wasn't the case because it wasn't COVID related. So yeah, we've had some challenges with the scheme. We've had people on rotation. Our construction sites came back quite quickly after 6 weeks, and then we had to deal with the social distancing on construction sites. But mainly it's been pretty smooth from our perspective, so and really helpful for the business.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. That great answer. Could I take that point again? So managing furlough, the rights of furloughed workers, to Catrin next, please.
Yes, certainly, although we don't have any furloughed workers. So I guess at Clarion, we probably did take a bit longer to come to a decision, wanted to really understand the context and the implications of entering a scheme if we indeed felt we needed to. So I think balancing the financial position that we're in, we're very strong, very resilient, obviously plan for the long term. Nobody would have ever predicted this, but we had to prioritise the kind of the need to do the right thing, as Nicola mentioned, with also the options that were available to us. And actually we wanted to keep doing as much as we possibly could. So anybody that was unable to do their normal work was redeployed wherever possible. The flexibility that our people showed and the adaptability that they were willing to offer enabled us to make that decision. But yes, our decision was very different, I suppose, to others in the sector. We felt that as we were in a good position, that we should allow others to take advantage of the scheme. And it fitted with the 3 aims that we set ourselves right at the beginning: to care for our people, support our customers, and to protect our business. And that was the reason for the decision. So we didn't use the scheme.
Thanks, Catrin. That's really interesting. Mara, could I go to you, please?
Yes, of course. I sort of support clients across a variety of different sectors. Hardly any of my clients are in what you might call the housing sector, other than 2 estate agency businesses. But obviously the government guidance was very firm that you could not move people either into or out of sales or lets during the lockdown period at first. So both of those clients obviously had to take advantage of the furlough scheme. And I'm pleased to say that I think with one exception, all of the employees were, able to be brought back from furlough. Estate agency is not traditionally something that is done remotely, although I think that there needs to be some rethink in that regard, because obviously a lot of businesses have moved at least partially online. You've got all the Zooplas and bits and pieces. And I have a client who's in construction, although not housing. He's in commercial construction, and in theory their sites were able to continue working, but in practice the vast majority of their construction workers were furloughed as well. So yeah, I've had a lot of clients who have been using the scheme.
Okay, I think we'll go on to the next point, which is about managing people from working from home. Nicola, would you mind just giving us a bit of insight as to how your clients have been managing that, and also maybe how your clients have been keeping in touch with people on furlough?
Yeah, no, well, it's been really interesting to see actually how things have changed during the course of lockdown, and now as well, with things beginning to open up again. Because when lockdown first started, it was all very much in kind of crisis mode. We're all in this together. We've all got to do it. We've all got to, just kind of hunker down and get on with it. And hopefully it'll only be for a few weeks. Little did we know. Initially all sorts of, headaches of varied amounts, depending on what technology people had access to at home, what their home working setup was. There's a big difference between those who perhaps had have home offices, have a really got a good internet connection, not competing with anybody else in their household for access to that internet connection, haven't got caring responsibilities at home. Not to say that they don't wouldn't also have anxieties about the pandemic, but actually already set up to work from home. In contrast, you have a lot of people dealing with caring responsibilities, whether that's of adults needing to shield, or kids who are not at school, to people with flat shares and trying to have 4 people all trying to work from home off one internet connection. So there was a lot of there were a lot of headaches for a lot of people and a lot of different issues, and trying to kind of keep everybody together in that situation was it's very much, as I say, sort of crisis mode. As time has gone on, it's been really interesting to see employers sort of recognizing that this is at least medium term situation. Even if we are able to start returning to workplaces, the disease hasn't gone anywhere, and with things like track and trace, for example, people are going to have might need to be isolating and still working from home for quite a long time. So it's been really interesting to see different employers develop different plans for how to manage that and what that means for their office space. But when it comes to sort of managing people working from home, I think it's been really interesting to see how you know, the embracing of flexibility and working from home. Of course, there's a lot of headaches with it, and it's not ideal for everybody. But I would say, you know, 6 months ago, I would say in a lot of organisations, it was still very much the exception rather than the rule. You know, there was this perception that, you know, oh, if you're working from home, you're not really working. You know, you're having a bit of a day off, are you? Whereas now, you know, we've demonstrated that the technology works most of the time, you know, that we can be just as efficient. You know, we're all saving huge amounts of time not commuting and huge amounts of money not commuting, you know, and all of that, all of those benefits. There are some, you know, there are some other issues, like, you know, you do have to make the effort to reach out and keep in touch with people. You know, you've got some people who live on their own, who really miss the social interaction of the office, so you have to make more of an effort to make sure you're reaching out and including them, and, you know, giving them the opportunity to keep in touch and maintain that team dynamic. So yeah, no, so it's been very, very interesting seeing those changes, and it's still changing, obviously. So I've talked enough. Let somebody else come in.
Could I thank you, Nicola. Could I take that to Nikki now, please?
Yeah, we've had a lot of challenges like everybody. I think I've definitely seen an arc from the start in March when we first went into lockdown. And I think that initially all the practical issues. We weren't a mobile working environment, although that was always in our future planning. We were very traditionally desk-based, so we had to effect a complete mobile working change within a week and a half within our business, which, big shout out to our IT department. They were absolutely superstars. So there was that big practical application of how do we actually physically work remotely that was the big issue at the beginning. And also it was all that underlying anxiety that staff had about desperately wanting to be working from home before the actual announcement came, because they either had family members that were high risk, or they had their own health issues. So we had to manage all of that sort of practical anxiety that was going on in the office, as well as the technical stuff. And then there was definitely an arc once there was sort of almost a sigh of relief as people started working from home. And then there was all the period of adjustment. And I think now it's definitely shifted to, is this going to continue? Can we carry on doing this? So yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I think a lot of our managers, as Nicola alluded to, definitely found the challenge. It's more time consuming managing people and managing a diverse or dispersed workforce. But we've, as a business, we've emphasised the trust that we have in our staff to do the right thing. We've promoted that we're all in this together, you know, whether you're furloughed or whether you're still continuing to be working. We've tried to communicate effectively with everybody throughout. We've, you know, teams have set up WhatsApp groups. I don't know about anybody else. I'd never heard of Zoom 2 weeks before lockdown. Suddenly it's the only thing I seem to spend my day on. So they're using Zoom team meetings, WhatsApp groups. We're all doing the proverbial quizzes like everybody else. Quizzes have never been so popular. We're doing virtual team talks or town halls. Our chief executive is online on Zoom for all staff. We're doing weekly briefings. So we've desperately had to up the ante on our communication, over communicating almost, and particularly around the areas of health and well-being, practical things about your desk and working spaces, but also the mental health. I think we've all experienced it in different ways. The isolation of working, the sort of anxiety, and juggling childcare. And I think that's the biggest thing we have to keep coming back to, is reminding everybody this is not normal working from home. We are still in a emergency business continuity, and that's a message we keep having to, because everybody's sliding into forgetting that. So juggling childcare, whilst, you know, partners might be key workers, working shifts, so they're gone at night, they need to sleep in the day, you've got 3 and 6 year olds at home trying to provide some work. So we've been just saying to everybody, do what you can. You know, we're just appreciative for whatever people can do. And our main support has been around helping managers to almost think outside the box of traditional working, how they can adapt to allow people to work different hours. You know, some of our trades have got equally childcaring responsibilities. They can't do their work necessarily out of hours, but can they do the emergency cover, some weekend appointments? So it's trying to get everybody to think a little bit more out of our traditional mindsets and into something different going forward.
Thank you, Nikki. That's a really interesting point that you've picked up on, actually. And if you don't mind, I'll just draw in one of the questions that's just been asked. I know I was going to deal with this later, but this is really pertinent to this discussion. It's about concessions around people that have childcare responsibilities at home and are trying to work. Because one of the things that initially when the furlough scheme and people working from home came out, initially a lot of reports were saying things like, oh, this is a great opportunity for women, because it's actually demonstrating to the market that we can work effectively from home, and it's not just women, you know, trying to have, as Nicola said, people were often suspicious it was just a day off, or, you know, you weren't really working. But then conversely, as we, you know, this is unfolded, what's transpired is it actually means, what it could mean is that women are actually at a disadvantage, because if we're working from home and primary carer for children or other family members, then we're having to juggle the two things. So having to cope with working from home at short notice, possibly without the technology that we would like to have available, and we've got children at home as well, and or family members that we care for. So really, what sort of concessions have you seen that people are making to sort of allow for that, Nikki?
We actually had a discussion the other day about the sort of equality impact of COVID for our staff, because you know, you've mentioned the impact on women. We've found as many of our male staff are affected and impacted by the childcare, because quite often their partners are key workers working in the care sector. Mm-hmm. So it's actually as many of our men that are affected by the childcare as the women. And again, you know, you just have to, it's that unconscious sort of discrepancy that creeps in, where you've made assumptions that it's, you know, maybe women doing the childcare, but it's, we have to enable everybody to think flexibly about how we support everybody's circumstances, and it's very much not a one size fits all, because you have to, and this is where it's been quite sort of important for our managers to know holistically their staff and their circumstances, because they are going to have to adapt to suit very differing needs within one team. So yes, that whole area around looking at your equality impact of COVID has been quite important.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because also I think there's been people have sort of forgotten about caring responsibilities and people who may have elderly parents that are shielding, and so, you know, the impact on them and whether or not they go back to the office and what that will then lead to is a point that we certainly have seen a lot of writing about anyway. And Mara, could we go to you next, please?
Yeah, I mean, I've got an example that I can share with you, which is outside the sector, but I hope it gives an idea of what some people are up against. So I have a client who's a secondary school teacher with 2 young children. One's a toddler, one's in primary school. And the normal childcare arrangements, surprisingly, usually involve grandparents, but sadly the grandparents are shielding because of age and health issues. Her husband works nights. He normally actually does quite a lot of the childcare for the toddler, but then he takes the toddler to the grandparents often so that he can get some sleep. Now, she's been expected to juggle childcare, homeschooling, and a whole new way of teaching via the video conferencing stuff. So she's been preparing classes to deliver to her pupils. Her husband has basically stopped sleeping in order to do what he can to help out. So the whole family is very, very stressed. There's been a massively steep learning curve for her learning to do her teaching remotely. I mean, it's a completely different thing. The only way that they have collectively managed is that she's been working late into the evening after the kids are asleep, preparing the online classes. As I say, her husband isn't getting any sleep because normally the place is empty during the day, but it isn't because they're all there. So she just basically got completely exhausted and stressed out. And I said, well, what is your employer doing to kind of support you? Eventually she got in touch with deputy head or whatever and explained the situation, said, I can't carry on like this, I'm going to implode. So they were able to rejuggle her timetable so that they created, I think it was 2 half days in the 5-day week when she didn't have any classes, and that gave the whole family a chance to either rest or spend quality time with the kids. Because in addition to all of the practical stuff that employers need to do, the sort of provision of tech and all of that stuff, I think there's also a need to understand that the emotional and psychological support that employees need, because especially working parents, I mean, any of you who are working parents will relate, I think. You've got that kind of constant background guilt because you're not able to spend like 100% of your time and attention on the job. You're not able to spend 100% of your time and attention on the children. Whatever you are doing, you're feeling guilty about not doing the other thing to the degree that you would wish you could. And that in itself is massively stressful on top of all the practical stresses. So yeah, it has been an incredibly difficult time. And for employers, I think there just needs to be a huge amount of empathy around people's individual circumstances.
Mm. Thank you, Mara. Really interesting points. And could I go to Catrin next, please?
Yes, certainly. I would echo much of what Nikki said, to be honest. I think we've all been on similar journeys where we've needed to allow 2,000 people to work from home in a week, including a fully functional contact centre. And our colleagues in IT were equally heroic. We could never have imagined achieving such scale of change so quickly. We were always very mindful at the beginning that a lot of our people don't work in an office, they work remotely anyway, and we had to be very careful that not all the focus and attention was spent on those that were working at home and how are they getting on. So we've always tried to balance and also acknowledge the incredible sacrifice that they were making in the early stages, given the fear and the unknown, and obviously their concerns for their own family. We then really started asking our people, which again is a bit of a change for us in the regularity that we were doing it, but asking those that were working from home to tell us what's difficult, how can we help you? Because as Nikki says, this is an individual perspective. Everybody's different and it changes. So some week it was fine and other weeks they were really, really battling. I think that's allowed us to be as flexible as we possibly can. So we focused in on those that were finding it difficult. We've allowed people to modify their hours. People have had time off to do childcare. We've had people working at weekends, early mornings, late nights, including in our operative staff. And obviously we had people that were unable to do any work as they would do normally. And we've redeployed them into other activities. Many of our people that weren't able to go to their normal job were contacting our residents and checking how they were and making those support calls, which were so valuable. On the productivity point, I would just like to mention that a lot of us have managed remote teams for many years, and we've got that experience and learning that we've been able to share with colleagues, especially from our repair operatives, because they are never in an office, never come in to have those briefings. So I think productivity in many of our teams has actually increased, and there is a little bit of a misunderstanding that actually productivity is falling across the board. It's not the case. I think the balance between that flexibility, the time saving that Nicola mentioned, and also the feeling of empowerment that people have now, that they are allowed to just get on and do their job. We are seeing definite improvements. So in terms of well-being, I think, again, much the same as other panelists, we have been trying to support and offer content that people can access in their own time. But ultimately, we know that some people want to come back to the office, and we'll facilitate that when it's safe to do so. And we are doing it already for those that really are struggling. So that's our take on that.
Oh, thank you, Catrin. That actually leads nicely onto the next point, which is about managing the return to work, and potentially requiring people to go to the office. What sort of issues does that entail, particularly with people who may have health issues themselves, may have family members living with them with health issues. Nicola, could I go to you first on that one, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's sort of two stages to this, or two parts to this as an issue. One is actually employers engaging with the question of actually who do we need in a workplace, what actually is required. And I've seen both extremes. I've seen at one extreme, right, we want everyone back in as soon as possible because it just doesn't work I can't cope with everybody working from home, to the other extreme of, right, well, we don't need our office space anymore, we can just give up all of that and have everybody working from home permanently. And I think for most employers, and certainly most employers in the sector, somewhere in the middle is where they end up. But there is an assessment of which roles do we actually need and for what, because most roles, as we've seen, almost office-based roles anyway, don't need to be in the office all the time. There may be some tasks which are easier to do. There might be reasons why, on occasion you do want to bring teams together, although, as we've seen with social distancing and COVID secure workplaces, actually, isn't it just as efficient to have a Zoom call with everyone? So that's the first stage. And then the second stage is if you think that somebody does need to come into the office at least part of the time, and they're reluctant, why are they reluctant, and exploring those issues with them, is because unlike, the one of the big changes has been actually the employer doesn't just have to worry about health and safety in the office, they have to worry about the employee's health and safety on their commute. How are they getting there, which is a particular issue in London, obviously, with most people dependent on public transport. So is it a general anxiety about this virus and whether it's safe? In which case, conversations about how they travel, times they travel, and the measures in place in the office to make it secure, make COVID secure, perhaps giving them the opportunity to come in at a time when it's quiet and see. There's so much about this virus which is unknown, and that sends people's spikes anxiety levels just because they don't know what to expect. If it's the case that they themselves are physically vulnerable, they have a condition which makes them vulnerable, or that they live with someone who might be particularly vulnerable, what safety measures are in place? What have you done? What have you changed in the workplace? How can you minimize the time that they spend traveling or out of home? And these, people's level of comfort with this will change over time as well. I think we all saw the anxieties about lifting lockdown and, oh, no, it's too soon. The virus is still out there. We're quite happy working, and over time, people just get used to the idea, slowly relax into it. And there's a conversation to be had about reassuring people. Obviously with the question of the vulnerability and who might be shielding or need to shield, from a legal point of view, obviously I'm thinking about whether there's a disability discrimination issue. Are there adjustments that need to be made for that particular individual? Again, how much of the work can be done from home, how much can be facilitated by technology, what do you actually need them to come in for? And then, as we talked about already, the other issue may simply be the practicalities of childcare and day-to-day life at the moment, and that's not going to change. We've got school holidays about to start, or have started, in some parts of the country, and we're also seeing, even with schools that are hoping to go back with everybody in September, they've got much more draconian policies about sickness now. Seeing in nurseries, a kid with any type of cold or flu symptom is out for a week unless they can get a test to prove it's not COVID, and that obviously has a knock-on effect on their parents being able to come to work. So this is not going to be right, we get everybody back and then it's back to normal, and this we're going to have to continue with this degree of flexibility for a long time, and I don't think that's any bad thing.
Thank you, Nicola. Could we go to Nikki next, please?
Yeah, I think we haven't opened our office yet for returners, mainly because we've been having some building works going on and we wanted to complete those before we had everybody back. But it's certainly part of our discussions now. It's about, I think, reassuring in the first instance. We've prepared videos of what the office looks like, because we've obviously made the social distancing changes, and informed staff about what it will be like to come back to the office. But I think sort of, again, it's about keeping that open dialogue. I think everybody will have a different personal risk appetite in terms of what their anxiety levels are in relation to all their individual circumstances, but balancing their personal feelings with trying to have fairness and equity amongst staff groups and teams is, I think, the challenge for all the managers. Because just because somebody has a higher personal risk anxiety level, does that mean that all of the coming into the office tasks and what needs to be done there is then incumbent on other team members, versus the practical, realistic, reasonable adjustments that you might have to make for somebody who's got genuinely a disability or an ongoing condition? So I think for businesses, it adds a lot of, again, opportunities for tension across the workforce. We've already had a certain amount of disparity that we've had to deal with regarding those that are furloughed and those that are continuing or required to continue to work, and what happens with holiday, and you know, how unfair it is perceived to be. So there's a lot of management of people's perceptions, expectations. So that communication piece is so hard but so important to get right. And I just think, again, it's continuing those conversations, continuing the dialogue, understanding everybody's different needs, and then being as flexible as we can be as a business in bringing everybody back in. But it's not without its tensions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. That's really helpful. Catrin, could I go to you next?
So we did the similar thing, really, and identified tasks that genuinely had to be done in an office. And we wanted to make sure that there was a fair and equality approach to this, and make sure that people felt that they were being considered. We decided to make 2 of our offices COVID secure quite early on, so that those essential tasks could be completed, and we established a rota so that people took it in turns to come in. We made sure those offices were places they could drive to. But you know, in the meantime, we were looking at those activities and questioning whether they really needed to continue to happen. And an example of that was that some of our contact centre staff were coming in to take payments because that was not able to be done securely from their home. But we then started the process of implementing software to help them to do that, which is now being deployed. So I think this, again, is another example of the rate of change is so fast at the moment. That would never have happened, I think, in business as usual. And it eliminates those tasks that actually the people need to come into the office for. So we're basically down to collecting the post, which is something that you can't really do remotely at the moment, but we're trying to eliminate anyone that sends us anything in the post. We've opened up several other offices for people to be able to drop into. So this allows them to do printing, collect keys for our properties, for example. But they are drop in, drop out, nobody's working there. And we don't have any immediate plans to open the offices for any greater usage than that. The reason being is that we're trying to look at our long-term plans now. It's a little bit early, and we're clearly not there yet, but we are looking at, well, what is it that you want from an office? So why do you think that your team would need to? And we're now surveying the staff. How do you think that you'd like your work pattern to look in the future? In the main, it's about two to 3 days in the office. They want a balance. We're not going to have no offices. We're humans. But I think on the point of those that were vulnerable, we spoke to them individually and talk to them about what would we do to help them feel safer going back to work, especially those that are obviously employed out and about. And I think that's been valued. I think they appreciated that somebody reached out and spoke to them about their individual circumstances. They were forthcoming with that information and were free to discuss those to any extent they wished. and we were then able to accommodate to their specific requirements. And I think that's what we should be doing as employers. We should be listening, adapting, and being the support that they need at the moment, because we get that back so many more times over in goodwill.
Mm. That's really useful. Thank you, Catrin. And to you, Mara.
Yeah, I mean, I completely echo that the starting point for this whole thought process for an employer is actually, why do we want people back in the office in the first place? If people have been able to work successfully from home and they've been productive enough, and you know, they want to carry on, then, you know, I think you should first of all question why you want them back in the first place. But secondly, you know, assuming that you do need them back in the workplace, then, you know, I've had, obviously, because of the nature of the client base that I have, I've had a lot of different experiences of how employers have kind of handled it. So from the sort of the first extreme, which was a young lady who was a single parent with an 8-year-old son, and she was furloughed because you know, she had childcare, obviously, while the schools were closed. Now the schools then said, well, we can have him on a particular day of the week, and so her employer said, great, you know, you can come back 1 day a week. And she said, fine, it's a Tuesday. And they said, well, we want you on a Monday. Now that may be because operationally that was their busiest day. But she contacted the school, and the school said, no, I'm sorry, his bubble is on Tuesdays, we can't change it. So she went back to them and said it has to be Tuesday, and they've kind of grudgingly accepted that. That employer, I have urged her actually to basically ask her employer whether they can use that 1 day a week when she is in to set her up with her laptop and so on, to have access to the company's database or whatever it is, so that she can actually work from home, you know, when, well, hopefully when he goes back to school full time in September, she could in theory even, you know, increase her hours at that point. So it could be a win-win. They seem to be a little bit reluctant. Then I had an employer who, the lady had been furloughed. She could have worked from home, but for the house, you know, the constraints within the home, very, very crowded, no suitable private space to be able to kind of focus. And one member of the family was vulnerable health-wise, so she was furloughed. And when the company decided, you know, the time has come, they put all the adjustments in place to make the workplace safe, they phoned me up and said, I think she's going to be reluctant to come back because of this family member who was vulnerable. I'm not saying clinically extremely vulnerable, but just had some health issues. So, you know, we sort of talked around it, and it wasn't the workplace itself that was her major concern. It was the journey to work. And I think that's quite a common thread, actually, that people are concerned about how to get to this safe workplace in the first place. This company is out in the middle of nowhere. You know, there's not really public transport to speak of. I believe there might be a bus once an hour or something. But her previous way of getting to work had been to get a lift from a colleague. And although the colleague was back at work, this lady was still nervous about sharing a car with somebody. So went round in a few circles about that. And then eventually the way that seems to have broken the impasse for that client was actually the cycle to work scheme. You know, they basically said, look, we'll help you buy a bike. You know, she lived maybe 3 or 4 miles down the road, good exercise. You know, I think you have to think outside the box to make these things work. My final example is one of my estate agency clients, and they started off by doing personal risk assessments for each individual based on things like their age and their distance from the office. And they kept some people on furlough longer on the basis of journey difficulties. And one of their employees, they actually, because it was really quite a convoluted commute, and that actually is a London-based business, so possibly more something your people can relate to. What this particular business did was said, okay, we recognize that you would normally be getting a train and a tube and this and that, and that's worrying. So what we'll allow you to do is to take an Uber across town instead, and we'll pay the difference between the cost of that and the cost of your season ticket for a period of 2 weeks, until you start to feel more comfortable, because as Nikki said, this is an evolving situation. And I think once, I mean, you know, think back to March, the idea of being stuck at home was really weird for all of us. Now the thought of not being stuck at home is really weird for a lot of people. So yeah, it is a developing scenario, and giving her that option allowed her to get, you know, to get her head around being back at work and getting used to the to managing the risk, because at the end of the day, yeah, the risk hasn't gone away, but we all are a lot more educated now about ways of protecting ourselves and with PPE and various things. So those are a few sort of examples from my experience that I hope might be interesting to people.
Thank you, Mara. Very interesting indeed. So obviously, all of us today, Wish is a networking community that's all about, you know, the encouragement and support of people in this housing sector, and all about championing beneficial outcomes, you know, very positive focus. So I guess this leads on to the next point, which is about future plans, opportunities for the sector. You know, where is this all going to take us, and how can we look at it positively, really? So if possible, I'd like to start with Nicola on that.
Oh, the big questions. Yes, well, I think, you know, as I've mentioned already, you know, the new flexibilities, the support with technology to enable, you know, when and how and where we work, that's not going anywhere. And I think there are huge opportunities for forward-looking organisations to embrace that. And as a result, I think there are opportunities for women. Although, you know, at the start of lockdown, and as I said, it will carry on, you know, there are, of course, issues with competing work demands, caring responsibilities, family demands, you know, and everything else. You know, there are also, the flexibilities do also offer opportunities. You know, we've seen that, you know, remote working is not less efficient, in fact, quite the opposite. I mean, thinking really big picture, I think there are also, you know, massive opportunities for the sector as we look at, as Catrin's alluded to, as we look at what offices are actually required for. I'm sure that we will see a huge decline in the number of offices in, you know, in city centres. You know, people want to work at home or work closer to home, and that's going to have implications for where people live and what they need out of their living space as well as their working space. So it'll, longer term, it'll have massive implications for where workplaces in comparison to home are. You know, potential opportunities for redevelopment of large commercial spaces into residential accommodation potentially. So yes, I mean, I think, you know, these new ways of working are definitely here to stay in varying degrees, obviously depending on particular employers and particular business needs. But I think, you know, there are also going to be massive implications for how we live and work, and the property implications as a result. So doing a bit of crystal ball gazing.
Well, absolutely, Nicola. And I think, you know, this is obviously a point maybe for Catrin and for Nikki, but you know, what we are obviously seeing is hyper-localism. You know, we are expecting more. We're spending more time at home. We're spending more time in our local areas. So obviously we will be looking to, you know, our housing providers and saying, you know, actually what people need is a lot more than perhaps what they needed before. And, you know, that makes you sort of look critically at, you know, where we're living, how we're living, what's nearby, all that sort of thing. And also I think, you know, one of the big opportunities for us is that, you know, whilst there has been a lot written about the challenges that parents face, women, if they are doing the majority of the parenting, but the thing is also what it has shown is how efficient we can be. So, you know, if we are under pressure time-wise because of childcare issues, because children aren't in school, or even if they are in school, they're not in their full hours, you know, we are showing as an industry what we can do under these constraints. So what could we do if we use technology as a force for good, rather than just being the bleeping emails that we always feel we need to answer, but instead of using it, you know, the force for bad, we use it for a force for good to enable us to work wherever we want to, and how we want to. So I think it's very interesting. Nikki, could I go to you next, please, on this topic?
Yeah, I think the pandemic's brought lots of opportunities. I think for us, we were already on a organisational development transformation journey anyway. We had a project to meet the needs of our customers in 2020 and beyond. And that's about looking at how we delivered our services, where and when. And that was a project that we were looking at creating a more agile workspace as it was. We'd already run workshops in January, ironically, thinking about smart working. And one of the biggest blockers that staff identified was trust in the workplace. And I think COVID has given us the biggest gift of helping people to recognise that actually you can trust your staff to manage themselves and do the right thing and make the right decisions. And I think going forward, I think that can only be beneficial for us in rolling out this programme more permanently. We always knew that practically and mechanically people could work remotely. What we weren't confident of is the skills in maintaining those communications, the performance management, the setting outcomes as opposed to, you know, managing by presenteeism, having those difficult conversations, keeping motivation and communication channels open, working with a dispersed team and a dispersed workforce. So that's the area that we're focusing on, is that behaviour change and support for our managers, educating, giving them the tools. So a programme that we'd already planned in for next year, we've brought forward because they need it now. But I also think it's going to change the way that we look at the office space. We've had some building works done. We were already planning to do a lot of refurbishment. I think we'll need to rethink some of that. I think we're right. I think, why do you bring everybody back in? So we'll be looking at perhaps making the office space more of a collaborative workspace. So less individual desk spaces where everybody comes to do their work at a desk, but more utilising the office space for those community activities. Because I do think there is still a necessity for people, we're social beings, having that opportunity to create times when people come together and can be creative and innovative and share their experiences. It would be a shame if we lost that with everybody working remotely, because everybody's functioning, but we have noticed that loss of that cross-team fertilization of talking, and we've got to create opportunities in the office for that still to continue. So from my perspective, and again, when you look at it from a housing perspective, I think how we design houses in the future for our customers and our tenants, you know, creating home working spaces within our new houses will all be things that we'll need to think about. So I think it's how you choose to look at things, but, you know, I think there's lots of gifts that COVID has delivered for us, you know, and I only hope, and, you know, I see no reason why we wouldn't take advantage of that and seize the opportunity it's presented.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. That's really good. Have you, Nikki? I guess it might be impossible to tell, but with all the changes that are going on and the developments, sort of to allow us to work from home in this way, do you get the sense that anyone at Ocean, or they may not be able to say, but are fearful of saying that they're struggling with it for, you know, worries about the sort of what may come next, you know, because there has been, certainly in the construction and housing sector, there have been lots of talks of redundancies, there have been lots of worries about that. Do you think people are frightened of saying anything because of that?
Yeah, I definitely think there's huge areas of anxiety around the business generally for lots of different reasons. people don't want to talk about the challenges of the sort of issues that we talked about, their own healthcare, shielding, childcare. You know, I think people, and that's something we need to be mindful of as employers, because I think people will hide their anxiety for the fact they want to be seen to be available and available to work and working hard. And we've already evidenced that during this time, that people have been burning themselves out for a desire to be seen to be working and available and up to the same speed as everybody else. And everybody's circumstances are different. Some people have no family and childcare arrangements at home and have complete freedom to work as much and as often as they want. Other people are hugely restricted, but it's a lot of pressure people are putting on themselves, and definitely there is anxiety around what the future holds. We have a construction business, and it is hugely sensitive to fluctuations with external things. So inevitably, we are going to have to manage that perception, anxiety across the business. So.
Yeah, because that's the reason I raised that, is just because that's been one of the questions that's been coming through. Actually, someone's just said, well said, Nikki. That's some of the questions that have been coming through about this this topic, is that, you know, the concern that people don't feel they can be honest because they don't know what's going to come next, so they don't want to say how they actually feel. But on this sort of future plans, opportunities in the sector, and maybe in particular opportunities for young people, Catrin, do you have any thoughts on what you will be doing at Clarion in that sense?
Yes, I think we have a very strong focus on trying to do as much as we can to help young people as they're starting out, and we are very focused on apprenticeship programs through our charitable arm, the Clarion Futures Foundation. I think at the moment, clearly there is an effort being made to trying to support that work, which is fantastic. And so we have two ways of really achieving that. One is through Clarion Futures, accessing that grant and then linking them with partners that we have already to really strong employment opportunities, and hopefully we will exceed the 4,000 that we got into work last year. And then secondly, of course, as a business, we want to attract the next generation into our workforce. So this is a really good opportunity for us to make the most of our apprenticeship programs, look at those opportunities for younger people, try to make sure that we are clearing the pathways so that there aren't obstacles in us accessing that pool of candidates, but also don't sell ourselves short. The housing sector, I don't think, always really emphasises the benefits of working. It's an incredible place to work, where I genuinely do think people get the opportunity to make a difference. And so we need to sell ourselves a bit better. So for us, we're seeing it as an opportunity to be part of the solution. We want to work, you know, with our local authorities, with our customers, and understand how we can best do that. I completely echo a lot of what Nikki was saying. Clearly, many of our customers, and indeed some of our people, don't have the luxury of space at home. And so, you know, the idea of a spare room is just alien. And so we have to do something about that, because they should have the same opportunity to be able to work flexibly as anyone else. I think on the offices, it's just a really interesting picture emerging. Completely agree about the creative space. We are not able to have good creative conversations. We're Teams rather than Zoom, but it's the same principle. And I think that's lacking. We're having the conversations that we need to have. We're not having the conversations that we don't need to have, but actually it will trigger a thought or understand part of our business. So we really need to embrace that. But also, we have large office footprint, as I'm sure you can imagine. We want to offer to work with others in the sector or with our partners externally to say, well, that we've got great space. So if we are underutilising it, why would we not work together and join up and find good ways of utilising it, either for our customers in the communities we work with, but also for each other, because there's savings to be had here. So we're looking at everything, but I think the other thing to mention is we are a national organisation. So as much as we are focused on whether we go to the office or not, I think it's really important that we still have a presence out with teams that don't necessarily work in a central office. It's really important they still see us.
Thank you, Catrin. That's really helpful. I think now we have to just quickly go to the questions. We have actually answered a lot of them as we've been going along, because all of you have given such good presentations. It's actually answered a few of the questions. But one of the questions is about you know, concerns about being constructively dismissed and whether that's sort of being merged into redundancies and things like that. Is that a query that you ever come across, Nicola?
Well, obviously, unfortunately, there are some employers at the moment. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that things are economically difficult. So there are employers out there who are having to implement redundancies. And, you know, that's very unfortunate. It's very sad, but unfortunately, it is a fact of business life. In it, obviously, an employer has certain duties and certain obligations in how it goes about implementing a redundancy situation. You know, it has to consult about it. It has to consider alternatives. You know, and you know, that happens in normal non-COVID times as well. You know, and unfortunately, there are businesses out there that are affected by the economic circumstances at the moment as well.
And this is a question, it might be from Mara actually, but there was a question about, you know, people's changing childcare arrangements. So for example, if, you know, as Nikki and Catrin were explaining, if following the feedback, what happens is we do go to more flexible working full stop on a permanent basis if we are 2 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it might be. One of the questions is about childcare arrangements and how, you know, people are concerned that they may make changes that then will be sort of redundant in a few months' time. So at the moment they need childcare at the moment, but will it change? And it doesn't necessarily fit nicely with the way that you have to give notice in nurseries, things like that. Have you come across any clients with those sorts of issues?
I mean, my clients have all sorts of different childcare issues, but my main comment, I think, is just echoing what Nicola said. I mean, a lot of my clients are having to implement redundancy, and I have to emphasize to them very, very regularly that decisions should not be tainted by discrimination around people's gender issues, maternity, pregnancy, or childcare issues, you know, and that is quite difficult for some of my clients to deal with. Given that most of my clients are micro businesses as well, alternatives almost don't exist. You know, they come along and they say, we've lost. I had a client the other day basically on the phone saying, you know, even though the sort of work that business does lends itself totally to being able to work from home because they are a digital marketing and web development business, you know, their client base, you know, had large scale sort of losses of business. And he said, I'm down to 25% of the workload that I had in February. And, you know, what do? You know, you can't afford to keep the workforce on, but it has to be, you know, we have to emphasize that the decisions need to be around what work is no longer required and not, well, Fred's not been very productive or not been very cooperative, or, you know, never answers my email, so I'm gonna select Fred or Frida. And that sort of thing, I think I've had an awful lot of conversations along those lines, really, about it not being. And I've had, you know, clients who've picked up the phone and said, right, well, you know, we need to lose, you know, we need to lose Mary and Joe and Sandra. And you say, hold on a minute. Do you mean you need to lose 3 jobs? And are those the people that are in those 3 jobs, or are there you know, a whole pool of people in those 3 jobs? And why are you saying that it should be Mary, Jo and Sandra? So yeah, there's quite a lot of I suppose, education around how to select for redundancy. As for the overlap with unfair dismissal, unfair selection, constructive dismissal, I am sadly seeing all sorts of really unpleasant and poor employment practices being flagged up to me. If I've got time for a really quick example, which actually shocked me, a young lady who was placed on furlough in April, but instructed by her manager that essentially if they didn't put in 3 days a week of, you know, picking up client inquiries and keeping things ticking over, it would not play well with the organisation. And of course, this is furlough fraud, because at the time we didn't have flexible furlough. She queried it. She didn't report them to HMRC, which she could have done, probably should have done. But she just said, well, so if a client phones me up and asks, are you on furlough or can I talk to you about X? What am I supposed to say? And the mere fact that she had queried the instruction seems to have been used against her, because she's now been warned that her job's at risk. So there is some horrible practice going on there. And unfortunately, with the people with the short service in particular, it's very difficult to be able to say, this is what you can do about it, because, you know, if they've got less than 2 years service, then options for litigation are very, very limited. So I hope
that's quite shocking, isn't it?
It is, absolutely.
Really. But just to very, very briefly, just to end on a positive note, there was just something that Nikki has mentioned that I thought would be a really good thing to end on. Just could you tell us very quickly, Nikki, just about smart working and your initiatives at Ocean that are sort of looking forward to the future?
Yeah, we are looking just at making ourselves more agile, and therefore work is what you do, not where you do it. So that's sort of our message in the programme. And so we're looking at, you know, where do our customers need those services to take place? And it's trying to meet the needs of customers, the business, individuals, and offer that flexibility that works for everybody. Yeah. And again, offers more opportunities for people who perhaps want to work at different times. So if we extend the hours of our customer service team so that we can cover weekends or later into the evenings, it gives people opportunities to work different shift patterns. So it's just creating improved services for our customers and our tenants, but also improved opportunities for employment opportunities for our staff as well. So it's just looking at changing the way that we view the way that we work. And I think it is having that flexibility to have different offerings. You know, it's not that polar. I hate that polar thing. You're either working in an office or you're working from home. And I think there's a huge wealth of ways in which you can work. And to be honest, even in our very traditional business, people have been working quite agile for a while. As Catrin mentioned earlier about trade workforces, they don't have office spaces. They still communicate and operate as a team and effectively manage themselves. So, you know, I think we're doing more than we recognise in terms of having agile working, but it's just formalising that in a number of ways, and hopefully, and I think what's brilliant, again, ending on a positive of what's come out of COVID, I think employers will be much more open and empathetic towards working parents. You know, it's actually not been a problem when you've got children interrupting Zoom meetings. You know, it's actually quite refreshing, adds another dimension. So I think managers seeing that people can manage what goes on at home and still deliver a good outcome for the business, I think hopefully that's a positive to take away from COVID.
Yeah, I think that is. So
yeah.
I could hand over. Sorry, Nicola, did you want to?
No, I was just gonna echo what Nikki said. I think it's absolutely spot on. And I was always a bit of a cynic about this, you know, the bring your whole self to work. But actually, of course, you know, this COVID has been a great leveler in terms of, you know, everybody's in the same boat. You cannot be but authentic when you're dealing with these kind of situations. And I think it's brought teams closer together. Because you know there's nowhere to hide in this situation. So you know, again, I think that can only be a good thing. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's perfect. But thank you for everyone. And can we just hand over to Hony now to wrap us up? Hony, you're on mute.
It always happens, isn't it? Whenever you're trying to talk, this mute session comes. What a great session, I must say. I can just carry on listening to this because it was fantastic panel members with all different experience and different sectors is bringing those stories. I just want to reflect on, even though COVID brought a lot of challenges in the sector, not just the sector, the whole world really, it also created lots of opportunities as well. Organization change, transform overnight. And so I just want to say, obviously, for me, we're looking at this is the work-life balance. You know, obviously there are opportunities out there and career opportunities. So you don't have to live next to where you work, and also it's good for employers as well as employees as well. So if you just think we just need to be mindful of the mental well-being of our colleagues. You know, the homes are not always palaces and heavens, as we all like to see. Sometimes it could be a prison as well for some of our colleagues. So just bear that in mind. How would you actually spot those signs, and how do we support our colleagues as well? Just that's food for thought. So I just want to say it's almost 2 o'clock. So I would like to thank you for all of you, because from coming out from your busy day to attend this session. So I would like to say thank you to all fabulous, all fantastic panel members, because it's just amazing to hear from you all. Just want to say thanks to Tracy behind the scene. She's supporting us with the technical support, who's our chair. I'm positive we will come out of this pandemic stronger than ever. We'll be putting together several other webinars for our members. Please join us, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. This brings to the end of the webinar, and see you soon, and take care. Thank you.